All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for week 81 economic update with we've got three special guests this week. So obviously me, because I'm awesome. We've got to my left, your right, we've got Shaquille Latimer, and we've got a gatecrasher, which we didn't announce to everyone. We've actually got Derek Whitaker also joining us today on the economic update, and obviously yours truly, Mr. Petith. So welcome again, Steve.
Thank you.
So let's jump straight into this one, because I know you're on a bit of a time frame today. What I'll also quickly do, just for the people listening online, can you hear us okay? And in the spirit of Warren, type a Y if you can hear us. I find that hilarious. He does not every webinar. So while we wait for the Ys to come through, so let's start. Thank you, Barbara. We've got obviously the Australian economy. So let's start with housing, Stephen. So during the week, house prices have been announced that they're expecting them to go up by 5%. Rent is due to go up by 15%. And also the housing supply will reduce as demand increases. We also haven't taken into account the 1.2 million or so immigrants that are due to come through as well. Then you throw on top of that, in WA in particular, we've got the Aboriginal Heritage Act, which could also potentially make building even harder for building developers to release more houses. Should we start with the special guest, or you want to go first, Steve?
Well, let's start with a special guest.
No, I think we should start with Steve. Because I'm still warming up, Steve. So I think we should start with you. I've already started. I've decided to do something really unusual and beam in from the wine cellar, just because it comes as such a surprise to you that I like my red wine.
That is unusual for you. Okay, well, yeah. Look, yeah, everything that I'm looking at on the housing data, and that basically tells me that there is no bottom. And crash coming in, as all these people say. Just basic economic supply and demand. The more I'm traveling around, the more I'm seeing people living in vans. Where was it the other weekend? We're out the back of the Gold Coast.
My garden.
What's that?
Sorry, it's all right.
Is it running to anyone whose phone rings during one of these broadcasts owes a carton? So Shaquille's offered up the first bottle of wine. Last week it was Derek.
and it's a carton of Grange, you know.
There's none left, Stephen. Remember, you and I drank it all.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we drank all the 97 stuff. When I went back up there, I've actually cleaned them out of the 2004. As for people living in vans, I think that's just Warren, isn't it?
Well, isn't Warren just living in a camper, a bit of canvas, and eating brownies? But yeah, and look, I'm seeing more of it, and it's not, these people aren't living in vans, and they're not living in tents and all this sort of stuff because they can't afford a house. It's just they can't find one. And you know, I predominantly live, you know, hotel to hotel and that sort of stuff. And I'm starting to see certain hotels and apartment complexes. Like, it's school holidays here on the Gold Coast, and I've got into an apartment complex in the middle of Broadbeach at a rate that is non-school holiday rate, right? So there is the normal people that would come to the Gold Coast aren't coming. And a lot of it's because they just can't afford somewhere to live normally. So they're running around trying to find their accommodation rather than holidays. And so housing is going to be a massive, massive problem, you know, going forward. And everything that the current government and past governments and even future governments, what they're saying, isn't going to help it. Things like the Heritage Act, the Aboriginal Heritage Act in WA, basically means no brownfield, infill development can happen. You know, imagine trying to, in WA now, you got a 2,000 square metre block. You want to put a development on it, you're going to have to get this Aboriginal heritage consultant out, right, to go and have a look at it. Then they're going to have to do a report. Then they're going to have to send that to council. So instead of an application that takes 2.5 years, it'll take 4 years. So developers will just go, oh, fuck it, I'm going to go somewhere else.
But I do have to say, look, it's one of the few times that I'm going to defend the left. Heaven help me.
Jesus.
I know. Heaven help me. If you lived in California, would you want? Well, maybe you've gone crazy or something, or you're dating an actress or something like that.
Or you, Derek.
Yeah, or you're on their drugs or something. If you were, oh, thank you. Is that the wine? Yeah, okay, thank you. Get some fresh glasses, please. If you were living in California, you would have to vote for the Democrats. You really would, if you owned property, because the fact of the matter is that if you own property, the last thing you want is small government to release all the regulations and make property more available and more affordable. The more regulations there are, the harder it is for new builds to occur, the more of a shortage there is in property, and the more the property prices go up. So the thing with it is that whenever we talk about government policy, there ain't nothing for nothing, right? There's always a trade-off. So the more libertarians, people like myself, have to recognize that sometimes actually it's in our financial benefits to make things as difficult as possible for everybody else around us.
Yeah, so if you're looking at it from a capitalist perspective, 100%, you'd be voting to make sure that, and it's your self-interest. This is what happens with all people and all governments and everything, and every time we vote, is self-interest gets in the way more than actual moral values and all that sort of stuff. 9 times out of 10, when you're sitting on polling booths and that, and you actually ask people what's going on, in times like now, they'll vote for self-interest more than they'll vote for anything else.
All right, so now that I've recommended to our audience they vote for the Labor Party, support the Indigenous Cultural Heritage Act, I'll show myself out there.
Yeah, please do. The downside of those type of policies, though, is okay. It's great for the people that are owning homes, right? Because their prices go up, it restricts supply. But then the downside is you can't live in those homes because you can't eat.
Yeah, but this is exactly the problem, right? This is the issue, because, like, for me, obviously, my age group, I didn't have kids when I was with my former partner for 10 years through my 20s because I couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford to have kids and give them the sort of lifestyle that I wanted to give them, well, certainly the lifestyle that I had growing up. Obviously, I can afford to do that today, but I'm 10 years older. And I think you'll be seeing young people that are priced out of the market that just can't get their foot, on the first rung of the property ladder. What do they do? But on the same token, we also have an aging population. And with that aging population, if we make, real estate, things like that cheaper, if we bring down the cost of living, what ends up happening, thank you. What ends up happening is that we end up hurting that other group. So there's a trade-off. And unfortunately, what we then see is we see governments do some of the most bizarre things to try to address this. So, for example, Australia has said that they're going to curtail foreign investment into real estate. So they've been doing that for ages. We'll take care of that, buddy. Yeah, thank you. So we've seen New Zealand do it. New Zealand say we're going to curtail foreign investment into the real estate market solely for the purposes of cooling the market. It's a nice way of wording it. Another way of wording that is we are going to deliberately cause the property market in New Zealand to drop in value, which makes the whole country drop. Right now, I'm not one for government regulations and taxes, but if you simply wanted to make it more affordable for young people to get into homes, you'd be better off taxing homeowners and giving some sort of subsidy to people rather than dropping the prices of houses across the whole board. That just doesn't make sense. I'm not saying that what I said is a good idea, but it would be better than what they're suggesting, right?
From an economic perspective, that is probably where you would end up. But then the other problem with that is with a country like Australia, especially a country like Australia, our 4 big banks are all basically powered by property, right? Most of when you have a look at their balance sheets and that, it's mortgages, right? So if you drop the value, and this is actually real life playing out in New Zealand now, as you just said, the banks now are scrambling to push off their bonds and everything that are secured by mortgages and wrapped with mortgages, because that hasn't gone away, by the way. And the Australians are doing the same thing to try and get other people to take them on, because they're diving. As property prices in
Who wants to
countries.
take that on?
What's that?
So who wants to take that on? What possible reason would you have for wanting to take that on?
Well, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to offload. If you have a look at the last sort of bond sales out of certain countries, Europe's in the same boat. I think the last sort of bond sales in Europe, only 40% of the bonds sold for most banks. So the people that are picking them up are the governments, because they've got to try and keep the wheels going around. So it's quite an interesting scenario of what's actually happening out there.
Well, it's an absurd. I'll correct the word interesting to absurd, because what we have is we have Treasury departments borrowing money, borrowing money through bonds, sending it to the Federal Reserves or the central banks. They're going out and borrowing the money in the open market, or just creating the money, inflating the currency. The banks then get in trouble, and they take that inflated currency and then buy the bonds for the banks to keep the banks solvent. Okay, enough magic tricks. This has to come to a head at some point. Yeah, this can't go on forever.
That's what we've all been saying for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
You know, since 2000 and since the mid 90s, when this really started to grow up. It's got to come to a head sometime, and at some point in time it will.
Well, I think that the strength of the BRICS nations now, and also the Middle East, starting to make moves. I mean, I remember you and I talked about this, Stephen, probably about 15 years ago. You and I discussed this, and I said I believe the Middle East will eventually, in our lifetimes, actually depeg from the US dollar, and we're beginning to see that. Right? The Saudis crossing their currency against the Chinese, which is a perfectly rational thing for them to do. Right? We can't criticize them for it. If you were Saudi and you were China, that's exactly what you would do. So that leaves us, and especially those countries like ours, which are somewhat reliant on the strength of the US dollar and the US economy, leaves us in a really precarious position.
100%. Saudi Arabia did an oil trade in rubles. So they're not just going and picking one country to do trading now. They're now trading across multiple currencies across the BRICS nations.
Yep.
And God, shit, we've been watching this for 15 years. And when you start to see, and I think we will see it very shortly, a major European country start trading in non-US dollars, it's well and truly over. And I can tell you now, Germany has been making those talks to buy its oil and stuff off Russia in the ruble. So, because it needs that more than it needs anything else. It needs Russian energy. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think most of Europe's in the same position, and the renewable energy guys, they don't give a shit about actually doing stuff good for the planet, because if they did, they would explore my favourites: geothermal, hydropower, some level of nuclear, and research into tidal power. They're not going to do that because there's too much money in solar panels and wind farms. Even though those are bad technologies, that's what they're going to push.
Thorium reactors, mate, been around since the 1940s, and could basically, you could roll them out tomorrow, and replace coal tomorrow and have the greenest power on the planet.
Yeah.
But we all know it's not about God, what am I saying? Saving the planet. It's all about saving the wallets of certain billionaires.
Right.
So talking about coal and the amount of jobs in there, we're just moving on to the budget now. So the latest budget shows that 140,000 people will lose their jobs. There are 300,000 jobs or more available. Unemployment is low and will stay that way for a long time. So moving from like the current energy production going to these thorium reactors and the other source of energy that Shaq was talking about, is there going to be enough jobs to sustain Australia and also the people trying to get into the housing market as well?
Yeah, so it's all linked. Jobs and housing is all linked because, and this is one of the other problems is people have jobs now, and since all the backpackers were told to go home, and a lot of the 457 visa guys went home during COVID as well. What's happened now is the Aussies that were working at the cafes and all that sort of stuff have been able to move up the rung and get into other jobs. Now we've got the bottom end, the cafes, the dark kitchens and all that sort of stuff that relied on those that couldn't get up the rung, or students or backpackers and all that sort of stuff. We don't have that big cohort. International students aren't coming back in the large numbers that they thought. Backpackers have been restricted because the cost to getting a working visa to Australia is astronomical. Someone said, I think it's 550, equivalent of $550 US. Canada has dropped theirs to 15. So if you're looking for a visa, right, and you're a backpacker, where are you going to go? You're going to go where it's cheap. Most of Europe, the visa cost for working visas in Europe, $50, right? We're pricing ourselves out of the market for the people that we actually need. So, and I actually think that most of the job losses that the budget's predicting and the government's predicting is more to do with their algos and how they run their forecasts for inflation, because the Reserve Bank and that relies on slowing the economy, which normally increases job losses. So if government wants to report that everything it's doing is working, the metric that Treasury will be working on is the number of jobs that have been lost in the economy. It's ass backwards, but that's how governments work. So they'll be predicting that there's 140,000 people over the next 2 or 3 years going to lose their jobs. But we all know that the amount of jobs, so the open jobs was about 300,000 end of last month. They're predicting end of this month the open jobs will be higher because there's actually more need in the economy. So it's quite a weird situation that we've got, that we just don't have. We've got this wedge that's going backwards between what the government's saying and what is actually happening in the marketplace. I can tell you out there, every entrepreneur, every manager of a small business I talk to, they all say the same thing: can't get workers.
Or you get workers that just don't want to work because they're so used to sitting on COVID benefits at home.
Was it $1,500 a fortnight or whatever it was?
It was insane. So especially when you got a couple of kids. Do you think the other reason why backpackers and the less skilled workers aren't coming to Australia is just because the housing market at the moment is so inflated and the rents are so high that they just can't find places to stay, like in Australia?
No, there is a lot of student housing available. Right, there is a lot of housing available in that market. Here on the Gold Coast, there is a lot of student housing available, but it is tailored at the student market, right? So most of those properties can't house families because they're the way that they're designed and all that sort of stuff. Now, and some people are doing it. We've got the house with 8 bedrooms in it that was a student house. They're starting to go, well, maybe I open it up to young couples or couples that are looking for 3-4 month stay accommodation until they can find other avenues. That's an option, and that is slowly happening in some places.
But it doesn't make sense. Look at the place that we've got, Stephen, in Sydney.
Yeah.
I've got a granny flat, right? It's a 2-bedroom. It's the granny flat wouldn't be half the size of the wine cellar I'm in right now. Okay. Yeah. The rent has just gone up from $280 is what it was a few years ago. And then it was at $350 during COVID. We are now charging $480 for that. The main house it's attached to, the 6-bedroom, 3-bathroom house that's attached to, is at $700. Right. And we've only just put it up It was at 600. We've only just put that up because we've included the bills, the rent and the electricity and the gardening in it. So it's not much of a difference what it was. So actually, if we were to rent out the main house to 2 or 3 different groups of people, each, somebody in each bedroom or something, we would be getting a much better yield than renting it out to a family. People aren't going to want to do it. Why would you do that?
I've got a friend of mine. She lives here on the Gold Coast, and that's her specialty: is finding houses, splitting them up for student accommodation or for worker accommodation in rural areas. So places that she normally gets, 300-400 a week for, she's getting 1,200 a week for.
Yep.
So why wouldn't she? Right.
Exactly.
And a lot of councils who are going, oh, you can't do that. Well, basically, yeah, you can, because you get one person that you give the rent away for half price to look after the house and hold the lease, right? Then he just puts roommates in. That's how they get around it and how they do it. And my God, you can make a lot of money renting out your rooms to people that want them.
Well, from a personal point of view, when I first met my wife, that's how we survived for about 5 years.
Like you rented a room to her?
Yeah, no, she lived with me. We had a 5-bedroom house, and to cover all our bills, but she was still on a student visa, we rented out the 4 other bedrooms, and we didn't pay rent, we didn't pay water, power, anything. Our rent from the bedrooms covered absolutely everything, because she wasn't allowed to work more than 20 hours a week. So that's how we got by.
Right, that's a good way to pay off a very young couple. But that's the thing, like,
also we have no kids.
If you're a young couple who've got kids and you're looking for a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house or something, you're not going to have great chances of getting it. That's what I said before at the beginning of the show. There ain't nothing for nothing. There's always a trade-off. So you look after the students, it comes at the cost of young families. Look after the young families, it's going to come at the cost of people that are on fixed incomes, on pensions, and you're going to hurt the students. And look at Western Australia, for example. We've got a 30,000 person waiting list for people to go onto community housing. And these aren't people that just don't want to work because they can't be bothered. This is our older population that have retired, that don't have enough money to be able to afford a place.
So New South Wales, I think it's like 90,000.
Yeah, but Western Australia has got a population of 1.4 million. New South Wales has a population of 7 million. So the fact is that New South Wales is only 3 times higher in their waiting list, but they've got 5 times the size of the population. Western Australia is failing really badly on this. They're failing with the healthcare system. And Western Australia has been a mess. Liberals and Labor have made a mess of Western Australia for years. And look, I suspect Queensland's the same, but you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Oh, Queensland's a basket case.
Yeah.
So
some of our towns here don't even have the basic services because the doctors and nurses are going to Victoria where they're getting paid 3 times as much. We've got doctors up here getting, and it sounds a lot, they're getting $65 and $70 an hour, but in Victoria they're getting
a doctor.
Yeah, they're getting 120 and 130.
How would you get a doctor for $60 or $70 an hour?
I find that silly because in Geraldton, a handyman's $150 an hour.
Yeah, I know, but that's what the government rates are.
Yeah. So
$70 an hour is outrageous for a doctor. That is so low. That's absurd.
Yeah, well, that's what they're complaining about. It is low, but they're going to Victoria where they can get 120, 130, 140 plus penalties plus. So Queensland's losing all their GPs and all that sort of stuff because they're going to where they make money, and you can't blame them.
So talking of money, and also because it's a good point too, because we've got Derek here as well. I want to move on to the markets, and I am just conscious of the time because I know you've got another webinar after this. So brokers are saying that there's not a lot of volume. So IPOs are also down. So I'm going to throw this one over to Derek, who's
throw it over to Derek. I'd love to get his review.
I think the interesting news this morning that I saw was that BlackRock are buying up big on Bitcoin at the moment, and a lot of people are really interested in that because they want to launch their own ETF. Exchange Traded Funds, for those who don't know that acronym, which means they also want to, in this one, it's a little bit different. They also want to be the custodian of Bitcoin. So it's fascinating because 5 years ago, there was a measurement in terms of how crypto performed in relation to how the stock market performed. we've been watching this merging as more ETFs come onto the market, these kind of products, where they're now starting to correlate more because bigger money is pumping that price when you bring in your industry funds, your hedge funds and that sort of stuff. So that's the latest that I've seen in that space, which is quite fascinating because, of course, is it actually private? How private is it? Now you've got hedge funds getting into that. And of course, it's taken a lot of regulation, and the SEC was knocking back a lot of the applications, even from firms like Vanguard. But now BlackRock are doing that. And I think the custodians they're going to do it through Coinbase. So that's the latest, greatest that I've seen on the market's conditions. And it's going to be an interesting space to watch.
Is this an indication that cryptocurrencies are finally being recognized as a serious investment strategy? Or
No, of course not. Let me just give a round of applause, a well-deserved round of applause to BlackRock, okay? Because you really do. When it comes to utter bullshit, corruption and manipulation of world affairs, BlackRock, you must take your hat off and stand in awe of what they're able to do.
Well, I think it's more about control, this move.
Well,
yeah.
So they have a market.
The other thing you got to remember is BlackRock will underpin the US Biden's bucks.
Absolutely. Now, BlackRock has a market cap of $100 billion. That's all the BlackRock's worth as a company. They have trillions of dollars in assets, okay? And what they are able to do is by them controlling these assets on our behalf, right? Because if you've got a super fund in this country, chances are some of your super money is somehow sitting with BlackRock, okay? If you've got money there, do you have any real say? Of course not. But those guys are able to vote on your behalf. They're able to control these companies with the ESG stuff that they're doing, etc. So this big buying that they're doing with Bitcoin, it's not because BlackRock has decided, oh, look, digital currency is the way to go. Crypto is the way to go. No, what they've said is, okay, there's interest here. We'll set something up and now they will have an oversized influence over that area of the economy. Yeah. Okay, that's all this is. So I don't think that means that crypto is mature now and is a great investment. I think it means that that BlackRock goes, we don't want too much power going away from us. Let's jump into this. And please remember that it's not BlackRock's money that they're spending to buy these Bitcoins. No, it's other people's money.
And they're doing it with single family, right? If you watch BlackRock, BlackRock is, you know, if a taxi driver tells you to buy something, normally sell it. And BlackRock is the same thing. So if BlackRock wants control of something, or if the government says to them, you know, go out and get control of it, they're the largest holder of single family homes in the US now.
Oh, and in, I think most of central London property is owned as well.
And Macquarie is doing the same thing here in Australia.
Yep.
Right. So these things are down. And I was talking to a broker earlier today who basically all they do is IPOs, right? They're running around trying to find something that they can get depth in, right? And they're just having all sorts of trouble. I think the ASX is down to, it'll do probably 40 IPOs this year, down from 300. And in the States, it's about the same. It's way down on the number of IPOs that will actually happen. So all these guys that have got cash, because there's still a lot of cash floating around with, you know, all the bond sales and all that sort of stuff, and governments put the money into the markets. They don't put it anywhere else. So they're actually running around trying to find assets to buy. So, you know, BlackRock comes up and goes, well, hey, we can control the Bitcoin market. We can control the single family home market. And the same thing will happen here in Australia. You know, the big guys will soak up the cash and go, oh, we can control this market, control that market, control that market. So while the mum and dads are running around selling, you know, which they always do. It's ridiculous. So as stuff tanks, mum and dads sell into the fear rather than buying it. You know?
Well, yeah, but to be fair though, you and I know this. If you remember the building that was next door to us in one of our early meetings, I won't say where that meeting was.
Yeah.
And I said, who owns that building? And you said it was Goldman Sachs. And I went, what the hell do they own that for? It's a piece of shit, right? But it was Goldman Sachs that owned it. So look, to be fair, it's not, I think that mums and dads don't want to buy. It's that they can't because they can't get credit. They can't get access to the money, right? You and I, if we go out to the market and say, look, we want to borrow $500 million or $100 million, whatever it is, we'll get that money really easily. But if, most people in our audience were to go to the bank and say, can I have $500,000? The bank will just laugh at him, right? So, and that's the problem, because it's not that they don't want to, it's that they can't. And then they find themselves over leveraged. They find themselves in a falling market. They find themselves in a situation where their mortgage payment is substantially more than what their rent would be if the property market starts to slide like it did in the 80s. And they go, you know what? I'm out here. Because they're desperate just to make ends meet for right now. Even though they probably know it's not the best financial decision over the long term, they're desperate for right now. And then along comes government, it says, well, we'll give you a subsidy, we'll give you this, we'll give you that. And the whole cycle just keeps repeating. And it's not like this is new. We've seen this in various iterations of this for decades and decades.
So 2018, 2012, 2008, 2000, 2001, 98, 96, every time there is one of these sort of blips, the same thing happens and happens and happens. And then everyone turns around and says, oh, the rich get richer. Well, yeah, the rich do get richer because they can get liquidity and they can get access to capital and all that sort of stuff. But the mum and dads of the world also don't do themselves any favour when they can most of them, I'm not saying all, I'm saying most of them can actually just sit and wait, right? Because time in a lot of this sort of stuff, or take the Warren Buffett approach, his best time to sell is never. Right? Try and hold it, because the over time, if you use the markets, for instance, they are up, right? Since 1987 to now, they're up. But people trade in a smaller time frame, and that because
what's the counter to the Keynesians, which is, hey, in the long run we're all dead. I don't want to sit here for the next 25 years because I know theoretically I'm going to double my money, because I'm almost 40 now. I don't want to wait till I'm 65 to double my money. I want to make my money right now. If I can't make my money here, I want to do something more risky with it.
Yeah, but that's you and I, Shaq, where we've got a different risk profile. But for the average punter out there, right, and it's just simple math. If they just kept putting stuff away, right, pay yourself first routine, paid yourself first, put it into a, even just a fucking index bond or an index play over their working lifetime, they would be better off. But they don't, because it's human nature to want to be in and out doing stuff, thinking that you've got to be active.
You might get a giggle out of this, Stephen. You know what I'm like, and you know what I was like in my 20s, where I'd come up with the fandangle ideas, where I was absolutely 100% correct.
Yeah.
But so I'll give you one example. So I was always against the real estate guys, because the things that they used to say I thought just didn't make a lot of sense, especially back in those days. But I used to say, okay, look, if what you want to do is you want a negative gear, and you want to, you get the deduction on interest because of the long-term capital growth, why don't you replicate that same thing with a zero coupon bond? Because Macquarie would actually lend you the money. So you'd sacrifice all your income, put it into a zero coupon bond, you get the interest deduction against the rest of your income. So, hey, you're not paying any taxes at all, and you get long-term capital gains. Now, for some reason, I can't imagine why, nobody was interested in buying that product from me. I was absolutely correct, though, wasn't I? But this is the problem, because you're not going to be able to convince people of these really complex structures because they don't understand them. There's not a lot of media coverage about them. So really simple concepts such as deducting interest on your investment property against your income and amortizing the value of the building structure against your income. People get that because it's been talked about for decades. But if you try and talk about that in relation to an installment warrant, for example, right?
Yeah.
It's hard work. That's why the banks don't really push them. It's a very lucrative product for the banks, but they don't really push it because it's so hard to get people there, let alone if you were to try to take them and put them into something more complex that someone like myself would, or you and I would engineer. It's just impossible to explain to people. So
And that's why a lot of these products go to the family offices. That their management teams are run by people out of the industry. That the actual family themselves wouldn't have a clue where their money.
But that's right. But the family officers, the people that qualify to be looked after by family officers or by asset managers, for example, they're not your typical mum and dad. This is where the problem is. You've got those two 25-year-old kids that have done everything right. They didn't do drugs at school. They didn't drink until they were 18. And even then, they only had one on their 18th birthday. You know, they got married early. They're looking to have some children. They've gone to university. They finished top of their class and they can't afford it. And then when they do finally save up enough to get one of the government subsidised programs to buy your own house, like Keystart or something like that in Western Australia, I'm not sure what it is in Queensland, you know, they finally get in and they're just there and they're kind of paying a little bit more in mortgage what they were renting, but, you know, they feel like they're getting somewhere. How does that young couple, when they get to 30 and they really want to have kids, how does that young couple get ahead? And they're not going to qualify for the sophisticated advice. They're not going to qualify for family offices. Asset managers aren't going to be interested in them. And this is the problem. It makes it so much harder for the typical Australian family to get ahead. Look, I'm not in that position anymore, but I know how hard it was to climb out of that. And for me, actually, how I climbed out of it was I left the country. That's how I climbed out of that position. So, you know, it breaks my heart to see that that's still going on now.
Yeah. So for the people who are listening, I just want to say, for the people who are listening and they do need to learn how to break that cycle, please email support@globalwealthhub.com and one of our consultants can talk to you about what you guys need to do or what level of education that can help you understand what's going on. Because I have to say, as someone who works in GWC, there's a few things that I haven't even learnt about yet that you were talking about. So I have to personally go through, re-listen to these videos to find out what they are.
Sorry,
and Travis, there's stuff that Shaq and I and Derek would deal in that we wouldn't even bring up here because it's just so far out from the main people that are here.
But just on that, let me say that even those of us that are more, say, accomplished or more knowledgeable in these fields, right? I've spent nights with Stephen in person, you know, have a few glasses of wine and we get talking and he'll tell me something or he'll talk about some investment and I actually won't know what he's talking about. He'll have to explain it to me. I mean, obviously I'll learn it, but I'll understand it much more quickly, but it'll be something that I haven't actually heard of or I'm not sure about. And I remember one time that I was sitting there with him and I said, I've got this idea. I won't tell them what the idea was, but I'm sure you'll know what I'm talking about. So I've got this idea and I want to run it past you. And he went, hang on, you're going to do what? And I broke it right down. And he just looked at me and went, wow, that's really fucking good. You're really, really clever. But that's the thing. Don't ever feel intimidated because we all learn off each other all the time.
And I'll say this, you know, having worked in the finance industry, not a week would go by where I wouldn't learn something new and still learning. You've got a student for life in this. So don't be intimidated by the jargon or anything you haven't heard. It's a rabbit warren when you get down in this game.
Make sure you ask because that's the only way you don't learn. In one of Warren's webinars that I first was with GWC, I think it was the Sovereign Individual, which is going to be rehashed again. So the details are on the website. He actually spoke about having a really good brains trust. Like if there's a section of the finance you're not good with, get in contact, have a mentor in that area that is better than you. So if you're not good at bookkeeping, get yourself a bookkeeper. If you're not good at accounting, get yourself an accountant. So you don't have to do everything yourself. So that's a big lesson that I learned from that one. So
I think the other lesson too is realize that like my students, when they go through our courses and stuff like that, they'll come out and they'll know more than the person behind the bank, you know, that they have to educate the banker on how they want things set up, which is really, really fun. Or even when it comes to trading, particularly, they'll know more than the financial planner when it comes to the actual precise how to put the trades on and this sort of stuff. The financial planner won't. And I think it's when you get that kind of empowerment that you start to just build on it and build on it and build on it, and your confidence grows as you begin to discover that. So, yeah.
So if you do need more help with that, make sure you do reach out to the team, our support at globalwealthclub.com. I'm conscious of the time, so I do want to jump into the global economy. So my personal favorite time of all these videos is actually the Trump watch. So Trump polls are steady at 52 to 53%. Supporters and donations are growing still. So
Yeah.
someone who's
Oh, mate, money's falling out of the sky for him. It actually looks like over the last week, DeSantis may have hit a wall, because what a lot of people are actually starting to realise, and some of the feedback I'm getting is some of the stuff that I've actually been relaying is people think DeSantis should run next time, so in 2028, not now. Get another 4 years of outside of Florida. The biggest problem that DeSantis is going to have is he's never done anything on the national scale. So the good old neocons in the swamp up in DC will just eat him alive. Same that happened with Trump. The first time around, Trump's first 2 years, he struggled against defeating the swamp. Did a really good job of it, but he's a really strong character. So the support is growing behind Trump in a massive, massive, massive way. It's really strong and stable at 52, 53%. Some of the polls have him as high as 60%. Now, this is GOP primaries, so we're not talking national. We're talking GOP people that identify as Republicans and voting that way. So it is still his to lose. There's talk now that even if he gets, say one of these indictments, he actually gets through, gets found guilty, spends some time behind bars, that may only make him lose 1 or 2%.
I actually think it's the opposite. I think
it's stronger.
I think that would actually.
My personal belief is it'll be stronger as well.
Yeah.
Is that that if they put him behind bars, he'll win the Democrat undecideds.
They'll make a martyr of him.
So let me just say on that, I think you're right with DeSantis. However, if DeSantis doesn't endorse Trump, it's going to be a really bad move for DeSantis. And if Trump didn't get the nominee, it'd be really bad. And I'm going to throw a red herring out there, okay? There's talk of, well, would Trump go and be a third-party candidate in the event that he didn't get the GOP nominee? Yeah, I think he probably would, because it's Trump that we're talking about. But I'll tell you what, could you imagine a Trump RFK ticket?
Oh, yeah.
Just imagine that. And if RFK doesn't get that nomination and links up with Trump, that's a powerful ticket, because I tell you, if there's ever been a Democrat or if there has in recent times been a Democrat that I could get behind personally if I was American, it's RFK. So, I think those two would just be an absolute powerhouse. And this talk about, oh, well, maybe we'll put Nikki Haley in there and all this sort of stuff. Well, look, why are you putting that? Do you wanted to counter Kamala Harris? Nobody likes Kamala Harris. So
this is the problem with, and nearly it's politics in a lot of places like America, is women don't do well.
Hang on. I bet you differ. Look at South Dakota. Christy Noem.
They don't do well at a very high federal level, right? And take my group of friends in the US. All their wives, right, and all the women I know over there all say the same thing. I don't want to vote for a bitch with balls. And to survive in the DC swamp, my God, you got to be. At a state level, different story. States do very well with women. And if you have a look at some of the states that have women governors, they've actually done very well. But when you get to the DC level, for some reason, women just don't do that well. And you know, it's a weird dynamic of what happens at the federal level. Now, would throwing a Kerry Lake or a Nikki Haley or something like that as running mate for Trump, yeah, is it going to add enough points to really move the needle? I don't think so. But adding a DeSantis or an RFK or something like that, that moves the needle.
So answer Aidan's question there, look, Kerry Lake on Trump's ticket, I don't think that'd ever happen. And I think that'd be an awful thing to do, because I actually personally think that I mean, obviously there was some serious issues with Arizona, but and Maricopa County especially, Katie Hobbs, just from the perspective of being above reproach, should have said, I'm in this election against Kerry Lake. I shouldn't also be in charge of the election, so I'm going to step aside. For her to actually be in charge, and then the Maricopa thing happened and all that. But Kerry Lake, I actually don't think she's a particularly good candidate. And I think she would hurt Trump by being there, because I don't think that she is likable across the spectrum. She's likable to us, but I don't think she's particularly likable to everybody else. Nikki Haley is a little bit more moderate. I'd love to see someone like Kristi Noem. She's not interested at the moment in federal politics. I'd love to see someone like her, because you like her. You can't help but like her. There's a number of others around the country where you can't help but like them. But yeah, I don't think Kerry Lake would be very good at all. And I think that the big wild card in this election is going to be RFK and how much he does, how much support he gets amongst the DNC, so not the DRC. The
DNC. You've got so RFK will take some RNC never Trumpers because they won't vote for anyone other. And there is a growing, huge divide in the DNC over Biden and Kamala Harris. But as one Democrat friend of mine said to me, he said, if we dump Biden, we get Harris and we're really fucked.
Yeah, but that's not really true. If they went to the primaries, if Biden quit, you get Harris. But if you go to the primaries and then Biden doesn't get the nomination, which is an extremely rare occurrence, so that doesn't happen, that the sitting president doesn't get the nomination. But if it did happen, it wouldn't be a sure thing that Kamala Harris would be in there. I don't think that she'd probably even get nominated at all. I think it'd be the same as the last campaign.
That's why I said they're talking about the 20. So they're talking about if the 25th Amendment gets invoked, right? And he gets ousted now, you get Kamala Harris.
But then they get to go down in history and say, we elected or we put into power the first non-white woman, just like they did with this Ketanji Jackson, whatever her name is, at the Supreme Court. I mean, what a complete disaster. What a complete farce. The Democrats are going to say, we're the first ones to put one there. Well, when the Republicans nominated a black woman, you all voted against her, right? So don't sit there and start playing the race card and tell me that you're all, you all care about these issues. And as for Tulsi Gabbard, one of the questions in there, she's no longer really in politics. I mean, she's a guest appearance on Fox News now. So
yeah, and she's in the same bucket as Kennedy. She's in that group of Democrats that really aren't Democrats, but they're not Republicans either. So,
well, I'd say they are Democrats. It's just that the hard progressive wing of the Democrats took over. The same with Republicans, right? There was a period of time when we heard from extremely ultra-conservative rural Republicans that were in power. And most of us that sat centre-right just went, who the hell are these nut jobs, right? So that's kind of the same thing that's happening on the left at the moment in politics.
Oh, and it's happening worldwide. The left now are so far left in the spectrum that the right of the left are seen to be where we would normally see the left be. If you know what I mean, like it's shifted that far over that the right of the left are now left. If you understand what I'm saying.
Because I get accused. I get accused of being conservative.
where the right to the left and the left to the right used to overlap, there's now a divide. And we haven't seen that for a long time. So.
But I get accused all the time of now, these days, especially by Americans, of being a conservative. But, you know, if you actually look at the things that I talk about, fiscal responsibility, yes, but on a lot of other things, social issues and all the rest of it, I used to be, when growing up, I used to be considered a bit of a lefty, right? And certainly I sit very left of people like Derek, right? So, but there are other issues that I might be even more on the right than he is. But that's everybody. Everybody, you can't put anybody just in this one category, right? People have differing views on different things. But for some reason, if you agree with 90% of something that the left says and 10% you don't agree with, you're a white supremacist.
Yeah. But
You know, including me.
But in politics, mate, we all know that to get to the top of politics, you've got to be a narcissist. So you are actually that person, right? Where 99% of everyone in the population are pretty much in the middle. They pretty much are some this way, some that way. The minority groups, like if you have a look at the real loonies that on both sides that are running around, they're only like 1 or 2% of the population, if that. And I'm talking about the voting population. But because they're so small and so loud, the media is picking it up because they need to run 24-hour news cycles. And Twitter lasts for, less than a goldfish's memory, right? So you've got to fill all that space. And that's why the fringes are amplified so much in today's landscape. It's because it's just all about sound bites.
It's a really good segue into the next point that we want to discuss is it's clear that they will do whatever to make sure that Trump doesn't win. Too much at stakes. If he does, war, money and power. So
I'd go further. I think that their lives are at stake because they've gone so extreme that if Trump gets in power, he stacked the Supreme Court when he was in power.
He didn't stack the Supreme Court.
Well, he put a lot of his judges in there.
Well, that's his job. He's the president.
That's his job.
He didn't stack the
He had an opportunity to put a lot of his judges there. Okay. Technicalities here. But my point is this, they've got so much at stake, the left, that they could be done for treason, a lot of them, in terms of what they've done, especially on the border issues.
And sorry, Derek, but why they won't let him win, in my view, is we're talking the major corporations here. I'm not talking about government. I'm talking about the real power in the US. Your Lockheed Martins, your Boeings, your big corporations that survive on this. That's war. Money, your BlackRocks of the world. Power is your consulting firms, your lobbyist firms. Lobbying is a top 5 industry in the US.
Yeah, good
right?
point.
They disguise it as consulting, right? But it's pretty much all lobbying. Those 3 power groups or those 3 groups, mate, they would all lose if Trump gets in this time because Trump's eyes are open now. Trump doesn't have an 18-month period where he's got to learn how Washington works. He's going to hit the ground running so fast, right, that jails will be so full with all these fools that they'll be deporting him to bloody Mexico.
It's interesting what he was doing when he was in the White House in terms of the deals he was doing in Europe and also with the Arabs and his visit to the Queen, which of course the media blasted, all that. It's really interesting how he was stacking that in his favour globally as well.
Yeah, well, just even doing the deal with him.
I'll actually go the opposite here, guys, not just to be the devil's advocate. I don't think that there's going to be I don't think the groups in power don't want him to win. I actually think the opposite. I think they want him to win because he can become the scapegoat for everything. Okay. He's going to be he's got 1 term. There's no chance of winning a 2nd term. So that means that they can blame him for making even more irresponsible decisions because he wasn't up for re-election. They can leave a devastated, dysfunctional Republican Party in his wake. Hey, it's great for ratings. and it's great for stirring up conflict around the world. So, what happened with NATO, except for example, with Donald Trump's criticism of NATO and Donald Trump's criticism of Germany, it was absolutely correct, laughed at the time. As soon as he left office, bang, we've got a war. So I actually think it's in their interest, and they're patient people. It's in their interest to actually have him there. They can blame him for everything.
Yeah, I can see that. But so on the other side, NATO, the WEF, all those non-elected organisations based out of Europe, if you've noticed after the last, probably over the last 6 months, they're all joining forces, right? So they're all joining forces. They're all signing pacts to get on the same bandwagon. We're now just seeing it in the media a bit now around NATO and the WEF signing the agreement, but a lot of that's all to counteract pretty much, probably what backing up what you just said then, Shaq, is it's to counteract the Trump effect, because they believe if they're bigger and there's more organisations as one, that he won't be able to do what he did by singling out the United Nations. But I think that personally, I think it's going to go the other way. The more that they try to be the one world government, unelected one world government, the more they're going to turn people off around the world, and the more Trump can rally the support to knock him on the head once he gets into power.
Really, what they've got to do is not just rely on Trump. I am so, and you've heard me talk about it before, I am so livid at the IDU. Why the IDU does not have a much more active, first of all, get your thumb out your ass, okay? And don't just represent some group of toffee politicians that have all gone to, Monash University and their equivalents around the world, and start actually appealing to the base, okay? And actually, look, could you think of anything better than a group that represents centre-right political parties around the world? Okay, they have such an opportunity to come in and really roll up the base all over the world, and they're not doing it. So hopefully Stephen Harper will do something with the IDU. I don't think so, but if they started to do that, you would start to see some real changes. Abbott, from the governor of Texas, he recently made some moves about, if you're a bank and you won't loan money to Texas oil companies or to Texas companies unless they comply with some bullshit rule that you have in California, we will actually prevent you from doing business in Texas. I'm paraphrasing that, but that was essentially what he did. We need to see more of that, okay? You don't get to hide behind rules and then breach rights and breach the free trade that we're supposed to have within a country. And the more of that we see, the more of that pushback that we see, the more that we're going to find people finally feel that they can actually say something. Because right now, most people are too scared to say anything, because if they do, then all of a sudden, oh my God, what's the repercussions going to be?
Yeah.
So one thing I want to
go in a minute.
Yeah, just because we've got to wrap it up, we do have a question there. So thanks to Frank for throwing this one through. What's your take on what is happening in Russia over the last few days? Smart move by Putin, or is this a threat to his rule?
Oh, I've got a really strong opinion on this. So Putin is actually, if you look at the apparatchik above Putin, they all think that he's soft as fuck, right? They all wanted to basically go in and wipe Ukraine off the face of the earth. American style, go in, wipe Ukraine out in fucking 6 days. On the 7th day, have a picnic, right? And Putin didn't do that. He just wanted to support the Donbass, and then it's gone backwards and forwards. This guy that's head of Wagner, he is a really nasty piece of fucking work. If he become the head of Russia, mate, there'd be nukes and fucking chemical bombs and shit flying everywhere. So this is what most people don't understand about Russia is Putin. We think he's a nasty piece of work. Well, I don't. I think he's a fucking puppy dog. But the people behind him, and it's the same with Xi, right, in China, the people behind him are fucking terrible. Pol Pot has nothing on what some of these generals and shit that Putin's got under control would do. They would wipe out fucking Europe in 30 days because they want to take control of Europe. They still haven't got over losing Eastern Germany. That's the type of people that Putin's got under control. And that's why he moved a lot.
Do you really think they would have the ability, though, to take, I mean, Eastern Europe, maybe former Soviet countries, but do you really think that they could make any serious encroaches into Western Europe territory?
They just nuked the fuck out of them.
Well, yes, but we've all got nukes too. We've collectively in the West got more nukes than they've got. They've got more nukes than the US, but we've collectively got more than they have.
That's the problem, is these guys don't give a fuck about the consequences of these actions. They just want retaliation. Right? They want to see the Nazis in Ukraine gone, and they want to see progress back. Putin's got them under control. Xi and his little cohort in China has the same group under control, from wiping out Japan and wiping out fucking, Korea and the rest of it. So we've got to be careful that we don't unleash, by the stupidest thing that we've ever done is support Ukraine, right? Ukraine never held up to any of its fucking political, what was it, the Minsk agreements and all that sort of stuff that it signed, right? But they then turn around and say Russia and everyone else hasn't held up and they're war criminals. Well, fucking hang on a minute. You fucking started it, right? You started it by not upholding your agreement.
Stephen, just because we've been told for 15 years that the Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries on earth doesn't mean that we should just fully believe that they are absolutely magnificent right now. Come on now. You don't believe our politicians? You really don't believe our politicians?
Hang on a minute. It's on colour on the ABC, so it must be true.
It must be, exactly. This is our taxpayer dollars at work. You skeptic, you. Great seeing you again, Stephen. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Lovely to see you guys. Thanks, guys.
Steve's got another one, so we're going to wrap it up. If you do have any questions or you want to see the follow-up, it will be online to see all the past 81 or 80 economic updates. Just go to globalwealthclub.com and sign up. There are free memberships there as well. You can see all these videos up there, or go to the YouTube channel, YouTube Global Wealth Club, and they're all there. So again, Steve, you're awesome.
Subscribe on YouTube for us, and then repost these on your own social channels.
Make sure you send them to your mum, because she'll get a kick out of them. Okay. We've got Shaki all the way from wherever he came from. We've got Derek as well. Ladies and gents, thanks again for coming on to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
To kick the habit that my mind